You hand someone a small booklet at an airport. They flip through it. They stamp a page. And just like that, you're allowed to exist somewhere you weren't allowed to exist 10 minutes ago. You've done this 100 times. You barely think about it anymore. But stop and picture it for a second. A line on a map decides where you can walk freely and where you can't. It decides which hospital treats you for free and which one bills you a fortune. It decides which army might one day ask you to fight. Now imagine that line disappearing. Not just one border. Every border. Every flag lowered at once. Every passport turned into a museum piece. Every country folded into a single global nation with one government, one currency, one law. It sounds like peace. It sounds like the ending humans have been chasing since the first war started. But the real answer is far stranger than that, and far more uncomfortable. Because the line on the map was never really the problem. For most of human history, you didn't belong to a country. You belonged to a group of maybe 50 to 150 people. That number isn't random. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years studying primate brain size and social group size, and he found a consistent pattern. The bigger the brain's neocortex, the more relationships that species could stably track. For humans, that number lands somewhere around 150 people. Beyond that, your brain starts losing the thread. So for tens of thousands of years, your idea of us stopped at about 150 faces. Everyone outside that number was a stranger. And strangers, to an ancient brain, were a question mark that could mean danger. That instinct didn't go away just because civilizations got bigger. It got redirected. Villages became tribes. Tribes became kingdoms. Kingdoms became nations. At every single step, the group expanded, but the underlying wiring stayed the same. You didn't actually learn to trust millions of people. You learned to trust a symbol that stood in for them. A flag. An anthem. A passport color. The historian Benedict Anderson had a name for this. He called modern nations imagined communities. You will never meet 99% of the people who share your nationality. You will never shake their hand, learn their name, or know a single detail about their life. And yet you feel connected to them in a way you don't feel connected to someone standing 1 mile away on the other side of a border. That feeling isn't logic. It's a story your brain agreed to believe, because believing it made cooperation at scale possible. So what happens if you erase the story completely? If every nation becomes one nation, does the ancient wiring finally get to rest? Here's the uncomfortable part. It doesn't rest. It just goes looking for a new line to draw. In 1954, a psychologist named Muzafer Sherif ran an experiment that still gets taught in classrooms today. He took a group of ordinary 11-year-old boys, all from similar backgrounds, none of them strangers to each other's culture, and sent them to a summer camp called Robbers Cave. He split them into 2 random groups. Within days, without any real reason, each group had built an identity. They picked names. They defended territory. They started raiding each other's cabins. There was no ancient rivalry, no border, no history of conflict. Just 2 groups of otherwise identical boys and the human brain doing exactly what it has always done, finding a line and standing on one side of it. The strange part came later in Sherif's study. Once the rivalry between the 2 groups peaked, he tried to fix it. He had the boys eat together, watch movies together, share the same space. It didn't work. Sitting 2 divided groups next to each other didn't dissolve the division. It just gave them a closer view of who they weren't. What actually worked was different. Sherif engineered a series of problems that neither group could solve alone. A water supply that broke and needed both groups to fix it. A stuck truck that needed every set of hands pulling the same rope. Only when the boys needed each other to survive a shared problem did the invisible line start to fade. Hold on to that detail. It matters more than it seems right now. Now scale the original instinct up to 8 billion people with 1 government and 1 currency. Do you really think the lines disappeared just because the paperwork does? Or do they just move somewhere your eyes haven't learned to see yet? They move. They always move. If every nation merged tomorrow, you wouldn't wake up in a world without divisions. You'd wake up in a world where the divisions had to find a new shape. Maybe it becomes north versus south. Maybe it becomes coastal cities versus inland regions. Maybe it becomes old currencies people still trust more than the new one, or old languages people still speak in the privacy of their homes. Think about it this way. Countries that already share a language, a government, and a currency still split along invisible lines every single day. Rival sports franchises in the same city. Political parties inside the exact same border. Neighborhoods that treat a single street as a wall you don't cross after dark. The nation didn't stop the human tendency to divide. It just gave that tendency a bigger container to divide inside of. So a single global nation wouldn't be different in kind. It would just be the biggest container that has ever existed for the same old instinct. And there's a colder practical problem sitting underneath all of this. Right now, different regions run on wildly different resource maps. Some places have oil, some have farmland, some have fresh water in abundance, and some don't have enough to get through a dry season. Borders currently do an ugly job of managing who gets what, but they at least create a system of accountability. If a government fails its people, that government has a face, a name, an address you can march toward. Merge everything into one nation, and you don't remove that scarcity. You just remove the smaller, more local systems that used to manage it. Who decides which region gets the water in a drought year when there's no longer an outside government to negotiate with, only internal departments competing for the same central budget? That's not a hypothetical problem. It's the exact problem empires have run into for thousands of years. Rome tried to hold an enormous, diverse territory together under one system, and it worked for centuries, until the cost of managing that many competing regional interests from a single center became heavier than the benefit of unity. The empire didn't fall because people forgot how to build roads. It fell because a single center couldn't keep responding fast enough to problems happening thousands of miles away, in cultures it barely understood. The Mongol Empire tells almost the same story, just faster. At its peak, it was the largest connected land empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the edges of Eastern Europe. For a while, it actually worked. Trade routes opened. Ideas moved faster than they ever had. But the moment the empire tried to govern that much cultural, religious, and economic diversity from a shrinking number of decision makers at the top, it began splitting into competing canates within a single generation of its founder's death. Bigger wasn't the same as stronger. Bigger just meant more places for a crack to start. A single global government would face the exact same math, just at a scale humanity has never attempted before, with no outside empire left to compare itself to, and no outside pressure to hold it together. So does that mean unity is pointless? Not exactly. Because here's the twist inside the twist. The parts of one nation that actually sound appealing, like open movement, shared resources during a crisis, no wars over resources, none of those things require erasing every border. They require something much harder and much less dramatic than that. They require the same 150-person instinct learning, slowly, generation by generation, to extend a little bit of trust across a line it can't fully see. That's already happening, quietly, in places you don't usually think about. International disaster relief crossing borders within hours of an earthquake. Scientists from rival nations sharing climate data because the atmosphere doesn't stop at a checkpoint. Vaccines developed in one country, manufactured in another, shipped to a third, because at a certain point cooperation stopped being optional and started being survival. You're not watching a world moving toward one government. You're watching a world where the invisible circle of us is very, very slowly getting bigger than 150 faces, without ever needing a single flag to come down. There's already a real-world experiment running that shows both sides of this at once. The European Union removed hundreds of internal borders, created a shared currency for most of its members, and allowed people to move between nations almost as freely as moving between cities. For millions of people, it worked exactly like the theory promised. And yet, ask anyone who has lived through a European Union summit meeting how easy it is to get 27 nations to agree on a single shared policy, and you'll hear the same answer every time. Slowly. Painfully. One old national line at a time, quietly reasserting itself the moment a hard decision has to be made. That's not a failure of the idea. It's the clearest evidence yet of what a bigger union actually looks like in practice. Not a world where the ancient instinct disappears, but a world where enough shared problems, water, disease, climate, trade, force that instinct to stretch a little further than it wanted to. The booklet at the airport isn't really the problem, and it was never going to be the solution either. The line on the map is just the visible version of a much older, much quieter line, the one your brain draws every time it decides who counts as us and who doesn't. Erase every border tomorrow, and that line wouldn't disappear. It would just redraw itself somewhere else, inside the same species, on the same planet, in the same 8 billion minds that have been doing this since long before the first flag was ever raised. You hand someone a small booklet at an airport. They flip through it. They stamp a page. And somewhere underneath that simple motion is 50,000 years of your brain quietly asking the same question it has always asked. Not where is the border, but who is on my side of it.